Hello, friends. Welcome to our sutta discussion. It's Wednesday evening. We have a couple residents with us here at the monastery who are staying. Now that it's the end of Vaḍḍha, Bhante Sudaso and I are in Italy traveling, and we'll start having residencies the first week of each month. But for now, we're going to be discussing one of the Buddhist teachings on the gradual training and 3 practices specifically from the gradual training. So we'll start by paying homage to our original teacher. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammaṃ Saṅghaṃ Namasami. So hello everyone. I see Joseph. Good evening, Joseph, Manal, Karuna, Julie. Good to see you all. So tonight we're going to be discussing a sutta, but it's actually a sutra sometimes, because this is from the Agamas. So these are discourses that have been translated into Chinese, but they're nearly identical with Pali suttas. So usually in Theravada Buddhism, we have the Pali canon composed of the Sutta Pitaka, the Vinaya Pitaka, and the Abhidhamma Pitaka. The Sutta Pitaka is the earliest layer, mostly comes from the time of the Buddha. And we have those preserved in Pali, which is an Indic language. So relatively close to what the Buddha would have spoken. Not necessarily exactly the same, but close enough. It's a transmission of orally memorized texts from the time of the Buddha. And then we have the Agamas in Chinese, which Agama also just refers to the received teachings. So it's what has come down. Agama means what has come down, what has been transmitted in the tradition. And Agama also refers to the Pali Suttas. It's just that usually we use the term Nikaya. So like the Anguttara Nikaya means the collection of numerical or incremental discourses. So it's a collection of discourses from the Buddha in Pali. But we also have the Anguttara Āgama. It's just a different term for the exact same thing. So here we use the term Āgama to refer specifically to the suttas that have been translated into Chinese by very early translators who came from India or regions around India. They learned the suttas and then they translated them so that Chinese people could understand them, just like we read the suttas in English today. And so today's discourse is from the Ekottarika Āgama. So it's the parallel to the Anguttara Nikaya. And actually the Pali tradition also knows a different name of the Anguttara Nikaya called the Ekottara Nikaya. So it's Ekottara means incremental by one or increasing by one. So the whole collection is made up of discourses that are listed by number. So this is one thing, these are 2 things, just like the Anguttara Nikaya. And that's why it's called Ekottara. And the discourse we'll be looking at today is Ekottarika Āgama 21.6. So if you're interested, you can find this on suttacentral.net. You can look at the Chinese. And there's also a translation, but it's not the best. They made a couple different mistakes that we might look at tonight, because the Chinese is very difficult to understand. The characters have many meanings, and there's only one character sometimes for very complex concepts that use Buddhist terminology. So it's very difficult to understand sometimes what these are saying. And I'm sure my translation has many errors. But there's a couple different mistakes in the translation on Sutta Central in English that we'll go over. So you can look at that, but just know it's going to be a little bit different from what we read here. Okay, so the Pali equivalent to this is in the Samyutta Nikaya. Samyutta Nikaya 35.239, the Ratopama Sutta, the simile of the chariot. So if you'd like to look at the Pali for essentially the same discourse, which we also will look at a little bit, it's Samyutta Nikaya 35.239. And so this discourse is essentially identical to that. There are other ones like it, because it just goes over basics of the gradual training and just gives a couple similes. So it's really not too important which collection we get this from. These are core Buddhist concepts that we find across the suttas and as taught by the Buddha everywhere. But this is the example we'll look at today, just to switch it up a little bit. We don't usually look at the Chinese. And so the discourse begins, thus have I heard. At one time, the Buddha was dwelling at Savatthi, Jeta's Grove, and Atapinika's Park. So this is where the Buddha often spent time. And then the world honored one said to the bhikshus. So world honored one is the Chinese translation for the Bhagavan, the blessed one or the Buddha. It's a respectful title for the Buddha. So the Buddha tells the monks, if a bhikshu is established in three things, they will experience skill in the Dharma and great joy in this life, and through diligent dedication to practice, realize the exhaustion of the asavas. So asava means defilement. So the things that bind us to samsara, the things that keep us from being awakened beings. So the Buddha says, if you're established in just three things, then you'll attain awakening. So just a simple recipe for free, only three things. And the Buddha says, what three? Bhikshus, composure from the sense faculties, knowing measure in eating, and not neglecting continuous practice. So these are the three things that the Buddha says. If you do these three things, then you'll attain awakening. So composure in regards to the sense faculties is how I've translated this. And in Pali, this is usually indriya samvara. So this is restraint of the senses. And here in Chinese, they've translated it slightly differently. They're referring to maybe a different term for it from the Indian languages. And the Chinese says something like tranquility and calmness in regards to the sense faculties. And the term is also used for nibbana, for awakening. So it means freedom from desire and freedom from anxiety and worrying. So essentially, it's referring to all of our sense experience. If we're completely tranquil, unmoved, and equanimous, we're completely free from any kind of desire and agitation in regards to that. So it's has a little bit of a different nuance than restraint, as the Pali says, which I thought was interesting. The term can also be used for withdrawal, so withdrawal from the senses, but that's a little bit of a less common usage for this term. So withdrawing from the senses and being completely tranquil and composed in regards to our sense experience. And then the second thing is knowing moderation in eating. So this is exactly the same in Pali. Bhojane matanyo, so one who knows the measure in eating. So it means moderation in eating. And then not neglecting continuous practice. In Pali, this is dedication to wakefulness or devotion to watchfulness. And we'll see it's very similar here. It's just a slightly different term for it. So it essentially means that we are constantly watchful, constantly wakeful and alert. And we'll discuss that a little bit. So what these three things are is they're just three selections from a larger teaching of the Buddha called the gradual training. And the gradual training is the Buddha's way of breaking down the entire path from someone who is a complete beginner, someone who hasn't even heard of the Buddha, all the way to someone who is an arahant, so someone who is completely awakened and they have freed themselves from samsara, they freed themselves from suffering, they freed themselves from any kind of affliction and attained nibbana. So the gradual training breaks that down into steps. And it starts with someone hearing about the Buddha, hearing about his teaching, and then eventually taking on the precepts. So the precepts of not killing, not stealing. It also includes celibacy because usually it's talking to monastics, but for lay people, it'd be either celibacy or avoiding sexual misconduct. And then not lying and different kinds of ways of using our speech that are harmful. So it goes into the essentials of our practice, the precepts. And the precepts are what lay the foundation for a happy mind. They lay the foundation for habits of mind that cultivate the exact same qualities that we want to cultivate to a higher degree in meditation. So meditation is just cultivating the same thing as the precepts, but it's very concentrated. So if we skip the precepts and we jump right to these three things, Well, it's impossible, because if you're restrained in the senses, then you wouldn't be breaking the precepts, because you only break precepts when you are stepping outside of, acting out of desire, acting out of aversion, all of the things that you're supposed to be protecting yourself from when you restrain the senses. So if you're practicing properly, you'll automatically be following the precepts. But if you're not following the precepts, then these things won't get you to awakening, because you won't have the proper foundation for them. So that's kind of understood in this discourse. So we're going to be talking about these things, but it's understood that these, in the larger context of the Buddhist teachings, these are founded on the precepts. And if you look elsewhere, the Buddha will talk about how the precepts come before this. But we could say that they encompass the practice of the precepts, because the precepts stop us from acting out of unwholesome mind states. And these are just protecting the mind from those unwholesome states. So if we actually protect the mind from unwholesome mind states, we can't act out of something that isn't there. So I think it's probably good to just go into these three practices and talk about it. A lot of times, we start with the precepts, we start with learning the basics of Buddhism, and maybe we learn a little bit of meditation, but what is the practice? What are the practices that we do, especially the practices that the Buddha taught his disciples directly, that we do throughout the day and that bring us to awakening, apart from, say, any technique? So sometimes we focus on techniques. So I focus on my breath here, or I recite this, or I think this, and we have certain types of meditation techniques that we practice to cultivate mind states. But the practices that the Buddha is talking about here are more behaviors, actions, and habits of mind that create the conditions for a breakthrough. And they create the conditions for cutting off of all of those defilements in the mind, that, like, things like desire, aversion, hatred, greed, anger, delusion. So all of those things that run around in our mind that keep us trapped in suffering. Meditation techniques are one skillful means, but the Buddha focused a lot more on what exactly is our attitude towards our experience. What is our approach towards every moment? So that's why the precepts begin his path, because the precepts are much broader. If you take on the precepts, then that applies to the entire time that you're following that, which ideally would be your whole life. Whereas a period of a meditation technique only lasts for the time that you use that technique. So these practices they never cease, essentially. They're constant. And they lay the foundation for deeper meditation, so things like samadhi and jhana and later things on the path. But they also provide the conditions for the breakthrough in and of itself. They provide the conditions for awakening in and of themselves when they're brought to fulfillment. So really fulfilling these things includes the whole Noble Eightfold Path. Okay, so the Buddha starts with restraint in the senses. He says, in this text, it's not sense restraint, it's composure in regards to the sense faculties. So composure, how are we completely calm, still tranquilized, free from essentially trepidation, we could say, in regards to sense experience. So what bhikshus is composure in regards to the sense faculties? It says here, if a bhikshu sees with the eye a form, so we can take a monastic, bhikshu means monk. If we take monk and just any practitioner, so if a practitioner sees a form with the eye, so a form is any kind of appearance, right? Anything we see. They do not begin to desire and ruminate on it, or follow and desire that form, nor do they direct their mind to it. Thus, they realize purity in the eye faculty, and for the sake of seeking liberation, they constantly protect the eye faculty. If the ear hears a sound, if the nose detects a smell, if the tongue senses a taste, if the body feels a touch, or if the mind cognizes a thought or a mental phenomena, then in the same way, they do not begin to desire and ruminate or follow and yearn for that mental phenomena, or yearn for that smell, yearn for that touch, yearn for that sensory contact, that sensory experience, nor do they direct the mind to it. and thus realizing purity in the mind faculty. Because of that, always seeking liberation, they protect the mind faculty. In this way, bhikshus, one is composed in regards to the sense faculties. So, as I said before, this is kind of breaking down the basics of what in Pali we call sense restraint. But here it's focusing on, again, that sense of composure, the sense of tranquility. So when we experience contact, so an example of this is you're walking into a grocery store and you have a plan of buying pasta and sauce and mushrooms and certain ingredients because you're going to make a meal for your family. And you're walking in, and then out of the corner of your eye sees a form, and it's a cake. And you're not supposed to be having cake because you want to make something healthy. But then you begin to desire and ruminate on it. So you start to follow it with the mind. You start to think about the cake. You hold it in your mind. You think, oh, it seems like the frosting looks really good. I can feel my mouth watering. It just, it would go really well with this dinner as a dessert. It would be so good. It would be good for family time. It's bonding. It's not really about the flavor. It's because it's good to just share cake with people every now and then. It's just a small thing. And the next thing you know, you've bought that and you're having it for dinner, right? So you acted out of desire, essentially. So you got the cake only because you desired it for this or that reason. And all of that thinking, all of that desiring, all of that, it just was a distraction to an original plan. So this is a very worldly example of buying pasta. But in the larger scheme of things, if we're constantly pulled by our desires, pulled also by aversion, so you see something or you hear a sound and you're like, oh, their voice is just so disgusting. I can't bear to listen to them anymore. I just can't bear to listen to this monk ramble on about these ancient texts. Then, that kind of thinking, it's suffering, right? It's not pleasant to be filled with anger or desire and then to act on it, right? Which is where I was talking about the precepts. So once these things invade our mind, once we don't protect the mind and they start to invade, then we start to believe them. We buy it. We tell ourselves a story and then we buy it. And then we follow along with that. And we act out of desire, we act out of aversion. And hopefully we don't break a precept, because something like buying a cake, it's just a minor matter. It's not breaking a precept. But this is why this practice, if we really take it to the extreme, then we wouldn't be doing anything out of desire. We would only be doing what is necessary or what's for the benefit of other beings or for ourselves, so for spiritual practice. But we wouldn't be buying things just because out of craving, let's say. So we might desire to go to the hospital because someone is sick in the monastery and we want to help them. But that type of desire doesn't need to be unwholesome. As long as we aren't craving, we're not relying on that and kind of suffering over it. Desire doesn't need to be craving in just the normal English sense of the word. But generally speaking, in Buddhism, when we talk about desire, we're talking about craving. So we're talking about a desire that is unwholesome, that is grabbing onto some object. It's grabbing onto some experience, and it wants it to be a certain way. And when it isn't that way, we suffer. We experience a little bit of stress, or it can be a large amount of stress. So if we grab onto the cake and then someone else takes it and there's not a cake anymore before we got to buy it, we might be a little bit upset. If we grab onto a loved one and then death takes them away, we might be a lot upset. But either way, there's a kind of attachment and desire into some aspect of our experience. And all of that is coming through the senses. So whether it's a cake or it's a loved one, we see them, we hear them, we smell them, we taste them, potentially, we touch them, we think about them. And so that's all sense experience. And if we're kind of pulled by that and drug around by it, then we don't have composure. We don't have tranquility. We're not free from that. Another simile that the Buddha gives for this is 6 animals. So he says, imagine that you have 6 animals tied together with a rope. So you have a snake, you have a dog, you have a bird, you have a monkey, and you put a rope around their leg, and then you tie all those ropes together in the middle. So the monkey wants to go to the forest, the snake wants to go to an anthill, the dog wants to go to the town to beg for scraps, the bird wants to go into the sky, and all the animals are pulling in the direction that they want to go. then it's kind of a chaotic mess. And eventually one animal that's more strong, it's going to win out. And then maybe it gets tired and another animal wins out. And there's just this kind of mess of animals that are trying to go towards what they want constantly. And so that's what it's like with our senses. So the Buddha says that the eye, it wants to go to things that it sees, right? The eye doesn't go to sounds. So the eye wants to go to things that it sees. So it's pulling us. But then we hear something and then we think about something, we're pulled by the mind. So these senses are like wild animals. And if we're caught up in them, we're constantly pulled around. We don't have any tranquility. And that's why when we meditate, meditation is a manifestation of sense restraint. It's a manifestation of composure. So when we meditate, sense experience continues going on so long as we haven't relinquished it. But we let it go. We don't get caught up in it. So I'm sitting here and I hear the sound of a dehumidifier or a car passing by. My mind doesn't follow that. I don't start thinking about it. I don't start desiring to get up and go act on it, right? So this practice is the same essentially as what we do in meditation, the same process of letting go, being calm amidst sense experience, but we can practice it always. So in the grocery store, in the monastery, by yourself, with others, we can always watch. So when I see something, am I getting caught up in the features? Or am I understanding that that's just what the eye does? It's kind of like the monkey, it just goes to the forest. Right? The dog, it begs for scraps. So today the cat killed a chipmunk before this. That's what cats do. They kill chipmunks sometimes. So if we, get really angry at the cat and we start screaming, then actually we're just harming ourselves. But if we understand, oh, that's just what cats do, I'm not going to get involved in it. Okay, the cat, made some bad karma, but we're not getting involved in any kind of suffering or afflictions, any kind of defilement. And we can still help the cat. It's not to say that we have to sit here like a dead piece of wood and not do anything. Otherwise, we're acting out of desire, right? It's just that we look, am I doing this out of an unwholesome desire? Am I doing this out of hatred? Or am I just responding to my situation? And as long as we're restrained and we understand, we don't, get caught up ruminating and desiring on things or hating things in our sense experience, including our own mind, including thoughts about ourselves or thoughts about others, then it's okay to respond and act. When we sit in meditation, we sit. When we respond, we respond. When we talk, we speak. So whatever we're doing, we do what's appropriate for that scenario. But we can always regard these senses as a process that we should be composed in regards to. So another example briefly of this would be, let's say you're in the grocery store again and you hear music on the speakers, and the music is an old song from when you were in high school and you had a high school band and you used to play songs of this band. And so then, it starts to get a little catchy and you start to really enjoy and delight in the music. Or do you hear it and you understand, oh, there's music playing. You can also understand that your ear wants to stay with that. The mind is, kind of trying to cling on to what's going on in the ear. You understand that and you say, okay, how can I develop composure in relation to this? Because if I get caught up in that music, it's actually, at the time, it might seem like enjoying sense experience, kind of ruminating on it and desiring it. It might seem like that's really pleasant because, oh, I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying something nice. What's wrong with that? But when we reflect, we start to see that it's actually more agitating than being at peace. Because one, the sense experience, it's not satisfactory. It doesn't last. So we get involved in it, but then, like I said, it will change. Or we get involved in it because we desire it. But desire is in the mind. Desire is not in the eye. So if you desire something, if I desire some form, something I'm seeing, I have a plate, and I really like it, I really desire it because it looks so aesthetically pleasing, the plate isn't satisfying my desire because the plate is just an image. What's satisfying the desire is my mind feeling like it has something that it wants. So it's all in the mind. And so then what happens is eventually we realize that actually the plate doesn't fulfill the desire. And so, but we don't realize that the desire is inside our mind. We think that it's in external objects. So then we chase another external object. So maybe I buy a new plate, or maybe I buy something else that looks really nice. So we don't understand that these senses that are presenting us with experiences, they are not satisfying us. when we feel satisfied by them, that's our own doing. We have satisfied ourselves. We've told ourselves another story, which is that, okay, I'm happy with this now. So we've just decided to stop desiring for a while, and that's why we feel happy. Right? So if I really want this plate and then eventually I get it, then I tell myself the story, oh, I have what I want. Okay, I don't need anything else. And then you feel happy. It's not because you have the plate, it's because you told yourself you don't need to desire. So the lack of desire is what made you happy. But then because you have this habit of chasing sense experience and ruminating on it and desiring it, it'll come up again. You'll feel agitated again. So this is really something to kind of meditate on, to really put into practice and see how peaceful is it to be going throughout life and have a still composed mind that doesn't get caught up in what's going on. So is it more happiness to just indulge in the music, or is it more happiness to be completely content and satisfied with no sensory input whatsoever, even if there is music? And I can't give you the answer to that because that will just be words. So it's something to really, really try. Okay, how is it if I restrain my senses? And I keep going back to this, but I think that there's there's a valuable contribution to this Āgama, this parallel here, which says composed in relation to the senses, because we do restrain the senses. So just like the sense is an animal in the simile I gave before from the Buddha, we have to tame the animal. So the Buddhist then goes on to describe how we tame the animal by tying it to a post. So then the animals can't drag themselves around anymore. And the post is a analogy for mindfulness of the body. So similarly here, there is a sense of restraint in that we are restraining our senses because, let's say, we hear something, we see something, we don't let that experience kind of like a wild animal go after what it wants. But in another sense, the sense it's not doing anything, right? It's all in the mind. So the eye, we don't have to, cut our eye out. We don't have to restrain the eye or like put a piece of, an eye covering over it. So it's not restraint in that sense. It's more, can we be composed in regards to it? Can we be free of desire for it? So the eye is just a physical organ that's functioning. It's not, is it me? If someone took my eye out, is that eye me? No, it's just an eyeball. It's not who we are. So the eye sees. So then the problem is that we forget that it's the eye seeing. And we think it's the eye seeing, right? Me. So it's not the eye, it's I. I'm the one seeing. So that's, I see the plate. No, the eye sees the plate. But if someone took your eyes out, you wouldn't have the experience of the plate anymore. So you don't see it, the eye does. So we just have to be composed in relation to that. We have to understand the eye is its own thing. It's seeing. And I'm not going to get involved in that. I'll use it as necessary. So if someone gives you a hammer, it's not my hammer. Someone gave it to me. I can use it. But if someone says, well, don't get attached because that hammer is not yours, that doesn't mean I have to throw the hammer. I can still use it. I just understand it's not my hammer. Someone will take it away. And then someone comes, okay, that's fine. It's not my hammer. And I give it back to them happily. So it's the same with the eye. If we're attached to our sense experience, even if we don't think about it, that means we're attached to our eyeball. Right? So we think, I don't care about eyeballs. I just really like looking at beautiful art. Well, actually, you like eyeballs. Right? You love your eyeball because that's what is giving you the opportunity to see that. Because as I said before, you're not seeing it. The eye is seeing it. So you really like what the eye does. So what happens then is when death comes and he takes what is his, which is the eyeball, because the eyeball is subject to death. When death takes the eyeball, or when sickness takes the eyeball, you think it was yours all along. Just like someone gives you a hammer, you think, oh, this hammer appeared in my hand magically, I guess it's mine. But it didn't appear there magically. Someone gave it to you and it doesn't belong to you. So it's the same with the eyeball. It didn't just appear magically. We weren't just born with an eyeball because God gave it to us and it's ours. We were born with an eyeball because it's just the ripening of conditions, right? The eyeball is just a manifestation of external conditions. It's not ours. And so when it is taken away from us, we will suffer if we're involved in it. And it's the same with the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, also the mind. The mind is harder to see here. So it's good to start with the body, but also the mind, right? The mind just thinks up thoughts. It just thinks up images. It sees something, it hears a song, and then it just plays the music again inside of itself. It's kind of like a huge cave in our skull that just echoes whatever goes in there, and it just goes around and around. So if someone says something to you, the mind might just all of a sudden make a connection and just, some kind of memory, and it will bring up a scene of what happened earlier in the day or later or 20 years ago. But that is not who we are. That's just how the mind works. So what we have to do is we have to understand that this sense experience, it's not ours. It is trapping us essentially to all of these things that also aren't ours and that aren't even satisfying in the first place. Even if they were ours, they wouldn't be satisfying. So it's trapping us and fooling us, deceiving us into thinking that, oh yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, look at this. This is so nice. Don't you want this? But actually, it's not. This is deceiving me into thinking that I have this. That as soon as this is gone, I don't have it anymore. It's just an experience. It's just a visual experience or the feeling of it, right? So once this is gone, I don't actually have the experience of touching this anymore. So it's deceiving me. And that's why the Buddha, actually, he says that the senses are Mara. So Mara is a demon, it's a spirit in Buddhism. It's a kind of a personification of this evil in the world. So he's called Mara, the wicked one, right? So it's not that in Buddhism, we don't have this concept of original sin or some inherently evil being like Satan. It's not the same, but it's more of it's a conceptual idea. I think we can all relate to this idea of, just kind of like the devil on your shoulder and the angel. Sometimes a thought will come into the mind. You don't even necessarily plan it. You don't necessarily want it there, but it says like, oh, you should say something unkind to that person. But you think, I don't want to say something unkind. Or they say, oh, you should buy that cake. You want it. It's really good. But I don't want to eat the cake. I'm on a diet. So it's kind of that Mara is kind of that. It's this personification of this being who wants to trick us because he or they wants us to stay in samsara. Right? Mara is called the king of death, but he's also called the kind of the ruler of the sensual plane because he wants us here. Right? Because as long as we're here, he controls us. So this is not to get too lost in the weeds here, but essentially Mara, the Buddha says that the eye is Mara. The nose is Mara. So the nose is Satan. I mean, because why? How is the nose Satan, right? The nose is Mara. I'm using Satan because it's just as kind of a funny analogy here. But the nose is this evil demon that's trying to keep us stuck in the realm of suffering. It's an analogy because the nose deceives us because we don't understand, right? It's actually our own ignorance, but it's this deceiving, this deceptory thing because we can't smell our own nose. We can only smell the smell. We can't see our own eye. We can only see an image of our eye with our eye. So it's this thing that kind of is behind all of our experience that's tricking us into thinking, oh, look at this. You want this, don't you? No, we don't. We don't want that because that is bringing us suffering. So a lot of talking to describe composure in relation to the senses. And that brings us to the second aspect of the training, which is moderation in food. And we've already talked about this because it's very related. It's very closely related to composure in relation to the senses and also sense restraint. Moderation in food, the Buddha says, how does a bhikshu know moderation in food? So in Pali, this is bhojane mattanyo. Bhojane is in regards to food, you know your measure. So how are you, moderated? How do you know the measure? How are you moderated in your eating? Here, a monk considers where his food has come from, reflecting thus, not for the sake of becoming plump and beautiful, intended only for supporting the physical body and sustaining the four great elements. Now, in eating, so this is talking about when you're eating, you're reflecting on your food. Now I will remove former pain, ensuring that new pain does not arise, in order that this body may be strong, and for the sake of dedication to practicing the path, and so that the spiritual life may not be impeded. So for the continuation of the holy life. So I'll just read this one more time. How do we know what is moderation in eating? Buddha says, a bhikshu, a monastic, a monk, a beggar, bhikshu is beggar, considers where his food has come from, reflecting on the food, not for the sake of becoming plump and beautiful, intended only for supporting the physical body and sustaining the four great elements. Now I will remove former pain, ensuring that new pain does not arise, in order that this body may be strong, and for the sake of dedication to practicing the path and the continuation of the spiritual life. And we chant this every day at the monastery. So Patisanghayo niso pindapatang patisevami neva, right? That chant is the same thing. It's just it's slightly different because this is an agama, so it's a slightly different recension of the same concept. But we can recognize, if you're familiar with that chant, you'll recognize the similarity. So in Pali, wisely reflecting on the food, you say neva davaya namadaya namandanaya navibhusanaya. So not for fun, not for pleasure, not for beautification and adornment, right? So here it says becoming plump and beautiful. In Chinese culture and in a lot of cultures in the past, nowadays it's different, but in Western culture, for a long time, being more plump was a sign of beauty, because if you're very skinny, then you don't have enough food and you're probably impoverished and you're a worker. So it wasn't seen as attractive, right? So in Chinese, they possibly translated for the sake of becoming plump and beautiful as kind of a way of understanding why do we eat our food? We might, I'm going to eat all this food so that my body is, I have muscle, and I'm going to eat this because it has lots of protein for my biceps. Or I'm going to eat this because it's going to make me look really round and it's going to be really attractive. No, we don't eat food for that reason. We eat food for the sake of removing the pain of hunger, because if we don't eat food, it's going to be very painful. And for the sake of bodily comfort, and for the sake of the body just simply living. We can't live without food. So the Buddha describes this. He gives a simile. He says, it's just like how a man or woman, were their body to develop a vicious sore, might apply grease to the sore so as to cure the sore with that treatment. In the same way, a monk knows moderation in food. That is, they consider where food has come from, reflecting that it is not for becoming beautiful, not for becoming plump, not for fun, not for adornment, not for pleasure, but only for the sustenance of the body. So it's just like what he compares it to a medical wound. So if we have a horrible gash, let's say that we cut ourselves unintentionally, we have a cut, and then we apply treatment to it. We don't apply treatment because it's fun, right? We apply treatment because we want to cure the illness. So sometimes people take medicine for fun, but that's because that's when you don't have an illness and you take medicine. And that's why the Buddha gives this simile. So sometimes people take food for fun. That's very often what we do, right? But when we're sick, when we're really sick, we know what it's like to take medicine only because we're sick, right? So it's kind of how I have the experience, for example, of when I was younger, I knew people who would take kind of ibuprofen or painkillers, Tylenol, for very minor things. And for some people, the pain threshold is different. So it's not about, what's appropriate. I'm not giving medical advice here, but some people would take it for very minor things. And other people, they would take it, they'd be in extreme pain until eventually they took it. And then they would understand, okay, they would relieve the pain. So I knew people, kind of in my life of all spectrums. And I'm sure we know people like that. Some people, they take medicine with the very minor things. Some people take medicine when it's more serious. Some people take medicine because it's fun. So self-medicating, drugs, alcohol, right? Alcohol is not really a medicine, but in certain tonics, in tinctures and things, they'll mix alcohol with herbs and oils, and that's medicine. So when we drink that, we know it's not to get drunk. It's not to consume alcohol. It's because it's a almost leaves very little trace. It doesn't have any really effect on the mind, but it's because it's in a medicine. When we sit down, if we have a beer or something, it's not because we're medicating a gash or a wound or a horrible pain. It might be a mental pain that we're dealing with inappropriately, but we apply medicine in an appropriate way. And point being, we know when we apply medicine appropriately. And it's the same with food. So when we eat food, we should reflect, what is this food for? So it says here, you reflect on where the food came from and what it's for. It's for the body, it's for our spiritual practice, and it's for removing the discomfort of hunger. So if we think this is for me to have a really nice, tasty dessert, that means that we've broke the previous step, which is sense restraint, right? We've delighted and ruminated and desired the taste with the tongue. But if we have a dessert in front of us because someone gave it to us as a gift because they wanted to be sweet and kind, I made these cookies for you, and they give it to you, and you're expected to eat it. Do you have to, put it in your mouth, and then as soon as they look away, spit it out because you just, I can't eat cookies because it's not healthy? No, it's not about that we can't eat certain types of food. This is, we have the right attitude towards the food we take. So when we have a cookie, if we have one, we don't eat it for the flavor and for the desire and to indulge in that sensory experience. We eat it because, for whatever reason, maybe it's the only thing that you got. So when we were doing Tudong in Italy, it's a practice of walking between villages. We would sleep in the wilderness, and then we would just go in the morning to a village where nobody knew us with an alms bowl and silently stand there hoping someone would give us food. Sometimes all you got was crackers or cookies or something. And you start to understand the difference between eating cookies for fun and eating cookies because that's all you have. And so there's that feeling, okay, am I eating this because I just want to enjoy the experience of food? Or am I eating this because I feel like I really, it's sustaining to my body, it's sustaining to my spiritual practice, and it's going to remove hunger. So a cookie might remove hunger if that's all you have. If you can choose cookies or rice and dal, and you can only choose one or the other, probably you would choose the cookie out of desire, right? It's very unlikely that we would choose a dessert or that we would choose to eat something over something healthier just for the sake of sustaining the body because it's healthy. Not really. So there's that sense of when we encounter food, when we can choose between different options, we should always reflect, why am I consuming this? Am I consuming it for fun? Am I consuming it because I think it's going to make my muscles look really good or something? Am I consuming it because it is, it reminds me of my childhood? Or am I consuming it because I think when I eat this, my body's going to feel very light. And so when I meditate later on, it's going to be very helpful to me. I'm not going to feel weighed down. I don't have to take a nap in the evening. That type of attitude towards food. How is it going to make my body feel for my practice? How is it going to ward off hunger? So something like carbs that will last very short. How is it going to sustain the health of the body, right? So some people, they can't eat raw vegetables, certain types of raw vegetables, because of a digestive issue. So if they decide, we have monastic here who can't eat certain, raw spinach and things like that. So if that person decides to eat raw spinach, even though spinach seems healthy, it's actually not supportive, right? So it's not about discriminating. We don't have to learn all the types of food. We just have to understand what's the purpose of eating, what's the effect of this eating on my body and on my mind, and just follow, just follow the right way that leads you towards a beneficial practice and freedom from desire. So composure. And when you do this and you gain comfort in it, then when you see food that previously you used to enjoy and you used to want to indulge in, you won't want to indulge in it. Because it's kind of like, oh, if I eat that, it's going to make me feel crappy. The sugar is going to make me feel foggy, or it's going to make me really sleepy and heavy after lunch. Or, oh, I don't, that doesn't really make me feel full afterwards. So there's this kind of, in the beginning stage of practicing moderation in eating, moderation in food, it's actually very painful for people who really enjoy food, right? So I used to, as a layperson, I used to really like food. I would go to, different restaurants and try different types of food. Oh, I want to try West African cuisine from this country, or I want to try Japanese food, and I would like to try different types of food. And it wasn't because it was healthy, but it wasn't necessarily unhealthy food. It was just because I wanted to try it. I just wanted to enjoy it. And so then when I moved to Argentina, where the city I was living in had basically only Argentinian food, which was good. And then you start to think, oh, in the United States, you can get food from everywhere. You start to miss it. Then when I would encounter those types of foods, I would have a strong desire to eat it because I really, now's my opportunity to take advantage and indulge in the sensory experience of the food. Right. So it wasn't actually peaceful. And if I said, no, I should be restrained I should be moderate in my eating. I should only eat because, not because I just want that food for the flavor of it. It would actually be painful because we say, I really want that and I'm not getting it. So there's that sense of dissatisfaction, right? We want the gratification in the senses. And there is a gratification there. It's not that sense experience is like eating a hot coal. There is a gratification. That's why we're drawn to it, because there is pleasure there. It's just that we only enjoy it because we don't understand that pleasure is, we aren't the ones enjoying it. So in the former example with the eye, I don't see pleasant things. My eye does. So if my eye sees something pleasant and I tell myself I'm seeing it, I'm enjoying it, and I feel happy on account of that experience, then I've deluded myself about that pleasure, because I've told myself that, I've taken gratification in something that actually isn't mine. So it's kind of, to give a more concrete example of this, let's say that you're walking down the street and you see an argument happening between two people who you don't even know, and they're extremely angry over a personal issue and they're yelling at each other. When you hear the words that one person says and the other person gets really angry, do you also get the exact same emotion of anger over what that person said? Probably not, right? So if someone says, oh, you're a horrible cook, you don't get angry because they're not talking to me. They're talking to somebody else. It's not me. They're not referring to me. But all you did was hear the words, you're a horrible cook. So then let's say that someone else later that day tells you cooked them a meal and you were, while you were walking to the grocery store to buy the pasta recipe I said. Then you come back to your house, you cook the pasta for your family, and they're like, this is horrible. You're a horrible cook. And then you feel sad and upset, like, that doesn't feel good. But it's the exact same sound. It's the exact same words. You heard the same sentence. So why does one make you feel bad and the other one doesn't? Right? Because you've taken it personally. But what have you taken personally? You've taken a sound personally, but a sound isn't you. Where does the sound come from? It comes from our ear, but is my ear mine? No. Oh, wait a minute. So what? Right? Like, what's going on? How does this work? How am I getting upset over one thing and not upset over another? Because the ear isn't mine, and all these theories. Because we delude ourselves when we experience sensory experience. Like I said before, we delude ourselves into thinking it's me doing it, it's mine, I own it, my ear, my sound, when in reality it isn't. And what this all means is that all the sensory experience that we delight in and that we desire, all of that pleasure, so going back to the idea of the pleasure not being ours, all of that pleasure that we are indulging in, it's born of ignorance, right? So it's another way of saying it is it's illusory. It's like a dream. It's kind of like if you're in a dream and in the dream, it's a nightmare. You're very afraid. And then you realize it's a dream. It's not scary anymore because, it's not actually me. It's just a dream. It's just an image. This dream is not real. It's not who I am. I am when I wake up. That's who I am. That's what we think usually, which is also wrong. But in the dream, we think, this is not my real body. It's just a dream. They can't actually kill me here. So it's the same in real life, though, because in real life, just like a dream, we don't own that experience. So in a dream, it's not real. It's not, the experience is real and that the experience is happening, but it's not real. What we mean by that is that I'm not here. Real always boils down to me. to the concept of me. I'm here. That's why it's real. So in a dream, we realize, oh, I'm not here. I'm in bed, so I'm safe. That's why this is not real. But you could say, well, in a dream, the experience is real because you're having it. So in a dream, you experience someone chasing you. In real life, you experience someone chasing you, the exact same experience. But in one case, when you know it's a dream, you're not afraid. In another case, you are afraid. What's the difference? Right? The difference is that in a dream, you are not there. You have removed yourself from that experience, even though the experience is happening. So even though you're seeing someone chasing you, you're hearing them chasing you, you're feeling the wind against your face, you know that you're not in that. It's just happening. In real life, it's the exact same thing. We are not in our senses. There's nothing in there. It's hollow. There's nothing here. It's just an eye. But even, like I said, you can't even see your eye. If you look at your eye, that means your eye's there. It's behind the vision. It's behind the sight. So just like a dream, you can't see yourself sleeping in the dream, but you know it. You know that it's not, you know that, oh, this experience unfolding before me, it's actually just a projection. It's not actually me here. It's just this unfolding images and sounds. But then we wake up and we think, oh, all these unfolding images and sounds, I'm here now, but nothing has changed. We're still experiencing an unfolding of images and sounds. Nothing is different. Like it's all the same. But we think, oh, but now I'm going to be afraid because I guess I decided to. The reason is because the thing that's trapping us is that because we get pleasure from it, we don't want to let go. So we think, oh yeah, it's all these sensory experiences unfolding before me, but I really just like to sit down on the couch with a good book and just snuggle up with a blanket. And because of that pleasure, because we are desiring and indulging in that experience, when someone tells you, like when a monk in the basement of a monastery tells you that experience isn't yours, why don't you just immediately become awakened? Because you have attachments. You can't let go. So it's the same, I'm saying this, but I'm not an arhat. So why am I saying this, but I am not, completely free? Why am I not completely awakened? Because I still have attachment. Right? If someone came in here and sawed my leg off, I wouldn't be completely equanimous towards it. Right? So there's that attachment to the leg. There's attachment to the body. There's attachment to life. And the Buddha says that this is the root of suffering, right? Bhava tanha, the craving to exist. Kama tanha, craving for sensuality. Buddha says that's the dukkha samudaya, the arising of suffering. So even though none of this is me, it's just like a dream. And in the dream, we can let go because we know, oh, I have attachments outside of this experience. I have things that are mine. So the reason we can let go in a dream is because we know we still have attachments, but the attachments aren't in that experience. So I think, oh, this is a dream. All the things that I really get to indulge in, I'll get those when I wake up. So I don't need to be afraid here. But the thing is, we only let go because we know that there is attachment elsewhere. There's gratification in the same experience of seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, thinking outside of the dream. We let go inside the dream world. We have to just understand that it's the same in the waking world, and that experience of letting go is complete freedom. It is the most peaceful, happy thing we could ever experience because it's not a thing, right? There is no thing there. We're completely independent of objects, independent of being independent because there's no thing that's independent. It's just complete freedom is how the Buddha explains it. It's complete freedom because everything that unfolds, it doesn't shake you. The mind is completely unmoved, right? Just like in a dream, when you know it's a dream, someone says something to you, you can respond however you want in that dream because you know it's a dream character. And this isn't to go into the whole domain of, does that mean that, killing animals, they're just dream animals, they're not real, or, yelling at people, it's not real anger. That's what we call the extreme of nihilism. And so there's these two extremes that the Buddha talks about. Just because things aren't ours, that doesn't mean that we just disregard it, because that would still be acting out of desire. There's still ignorance there. It's a little bit more subtle, so we're not going to go into it here. But to get back to eating rice, when we're eating rice, we just we start with the very basics. So all of that I've just described, the complete liberation from suffering and no experience and complete non-self and all these profound, deep philosophical concepts, that all starts with just eating your rice and understanding, I just need to just enjoy this. I need to just eat this for the sake of my spiritual practice. That's where it starts. It's extremely simple. It's down to earth. When you see something, just understand, I'm not going to get caught in that. I'm just going to remain peaceful here. All of that starts with this practice. So when you're eating food, when you're encountering sensory experiences, just understand, even if you can't quite wrap your mind around the whole idea that I've kind of been rambling on about things not being ours, still do it, because you'll still get benefit from it. And that practice will lead into understanding. If you start out with, I don't know exactly how this all works, but I know that peace and contentment in my life is beneficial to me, then this is the practice of peace and contentment. It's being unshaken. I can be peaceful no matter what happens. And that peace and contentment will be beneficial. Once you have that peace and contentment, you'll be less attached to food. You'll be less attached to sensual experience. And you'll be able to eat only, just to continue practicing. You won't be hungry. You won't be killing your body. You won't be torturing yourself, but you won't be attaching yourself to that experience. And that freedom from attachment, that peace, that's the condition for your mind to let go and understand. So once we let go, once we start to get that peace, the peace that comes from relinquishment, the peace that comes from not identifying, that will lead into the understanding of non-identification, right? By its very nature. So speeding through here, the Buddha says, so we know moderation in food, just like the medicine. He gives another simile. He says, it's just as a cart carrying heavy loads would have its wheels oiled so that the load is capable of reaching its destination. So just as a heavy cart, you oil the wheels so that the cart is able to bring the supplies to the next destination. In the same way, we reflect on food for the proper reason, and this is how someone knows moderation in food. So the chariot simile, it's the same as the medicine simile. We don't oil chariot wheels because we want to be plump and beautiful. We oil chariot wheels. It's practical. It's a completely practical activity. So with eating, it's just a practical activity. You don't have to, kill yourself and eat. I'm going to eat the most unpleasant foods that I don't desire to taste. I'm going to pick the thing that I hate the most, because otherwise I'd be acting out of desire. You don't need to. I'm going to only eat a little bit of food because otherwise I'm just doing it I'm just eating too much because I want to feel full. We don't need to be extreme here. Okay. You just eat your food and you just understand why you're doing it. You just reflect properly. And if you catch yourself indulging in it, so your mind getting stuck in that experience, bring your mindfulness back to the chewing. This is very helpful, I found, with food, because chewing it's very tiresome. It's just over and over again. And it's kind of, you start to focus on it. You start to realize, wow, I don't really want to be sitting here eating all the time. I'd rather be doing something else. So just, if you catch yourself kind of getting caught up in that experience, you don't need to philosophize about everything that I've talked to you. That's the context. That's to draw this out, but bring it back to down to earth things. Just, why am I doing this again? What's actually happening here? Oh, I'm just sitting here munching like this. Why am I doing this? Oh, so that my body doesn't wither away and die. Oh, so that I'm healthy enough to actually practice and, communicate with others and hold up my responsibilities in life. So just bring yourself back. Just bring yourself back to the body. Bring yourself back to chewing, and just reflect on what you're doing, and just continue eating. You don't need to do anything much more complicated than that. And as you do that, your wisdom will start to naturally mature. If you get ahead of yourself and you try to philosophize around, I'm eating because this mouth is experiencing the food. And if you try to philosophize around it and it hasn't sunk in, you're actually not restraining the mind faculty, right? You're getting caught in all these thoughts, and you're entangling yourself in the thought world. So the thought world is just another sense. So don't kill yourself here. Just enjoy, basically, the process of contentment. So you can enjoy the process of eating, because eating is just a neutral activity, right? What we don't enjoy is the delight and the gratification and the sensory experience of food. But if we're just sitting here feeling completely content, oh, no matter what food's in front of me, it's healthy, it's going to sustain my body, or even it's not healthy, I don't have healthy food available, but I'm going to do this so that my body stays alive. I can enjoy that action because that's part of my practice. So enjoy your practice, enjoy the practice of mindfulness, enjoy the practice of contentment. That type of pleasure will lead you onwards. Don't enjoy the pleasure that is kind of presenting itself to you, like this appearance of the food. Enjoy this pleasure of unwaveringness in the face of these phenomena before us. So just bring it back, enjoy that experience. And then the last practice before we get on to questions and more discussion, Buddha says, what bhikshus is not neglecting continuous exertion? Or another translation is, what is not neglecting continuous practice? So this is a little aside here, very briefly. If you go to Sutta Central and you look at the translation of this, the translation that's available currently says, how does a monk not neglect his walking exercises? So how do we get from walking exercises to continuous practice? The Chinese is really, the word for walking is xing, is a very common word that also refers to things like just volition and exertion and mental kind of intentional striving or intentional activity. So the word xing is very ambiguous, and it's very easy to get caught up in what this is saying. This passage is a little bit confusing because it uses the word xing in one sense, and then it uses it in the sense of actual walking physically. So it's just as a very brief aside, if you see that in the translation, I'm saying something different because I realized that was a mistake in the reading of the text. It doesn't refer to walking here. It's referring to continuous, we could say striving, continuous exertion. So the simple way of saying it is continuous practice. So how do we not neglect continuous practice? Right, so continuous practice, practicing all the time, always taking advantage of opportunity to cultivate these wholesome qualities. How do we not neglect that? Here, a bhikshu, towards the beginning of the night and towards the end of the night, is dedicated to unremitting mindfulness, not wasting the opportunity to practice, ever mindfully directing their intent on the aids to enlightenment or the factors of the path. So ever mindfully directing their intent on what we could say is the exact practices that lead to awakening, some of which we've been talking about. So beginning of the night and then the end of the night, we're dedicated to unremitting mindfulness, not wasting the opportunity to practice. During the daytime, whether walking or sitting, they direct their mind to the profound dharma, to the subtle teaching, ridding themselves of obstructive hindrances. Again, during the first watch of the night, whether walking or sitting, they direct their mind to the subtle dharma, ridding themselves of obstructive hindrances. Again, during the middle of the night, they lie down on their right side, directing their attention to waking. Then they get up during the last watch of the night, and whether walking or sitting, direct the mind to the profound practice, ridding themselves of obstructive hindrances. This is how a bhikshu does not neglect continuous practice. So just to unpack this a little bit, in Pali, this is called devotion to wakefulness. So Jagadya means wakefulness or watchfulness. So Jagadya, it means being alert. So like when you're awake, you're alert. You're not in a sleep state. But in a more profound sense, it's, you're aware of what's happening, essentially. You're not in a dull stupor. So it's being alert. And in Pali, it's called Jagadya Anuyutta. So dedication or kind of exertion, practicing alertness, practicing wakefulness is how it's usually translated, which we understand from the context, this seems to be talking about the nighttime and sleeping. So that's why it's often called wakefulness, because essentially, it's about how during the day, it refers to the day as well. It says during the day, whether walking or sitting, they direct their mind to the profound Dharma, ridding themselves of obstructive hindrances. So during the daytime, whether walking or sitting, this is referring to walking meditation and sitting meditation. So walking back and forth, this is a form of meditation that's very common. And sitting meditation is obviously, I assume we're all familiar with that, where we meditate sitting down. So cultivating wholesome qualities. So the word for meditation, what it says here is they direct their mind to the profound Dharma, ridding themselves of obstructive hindrances. So we direct our mind essentially in line with reality. The profound Dharma. This is a little bit hard to translate, but in Chinese, it literally means the subtle Dharma, or the mysterious Dharma. But it also refers to like a teaching, or the profound Dharma in Buddhism is the reality of things that's so profound, is so subtle, that if we wake up to it, we become a Buddha, an awakened one. So we direct our mind towards reality, and we rid ourselves of obstructive hindrances. So what is obstructing us from reality? Well, I've talked about some. It's this desire for sense experience. And one of the things that it's talking about here is laziness. So you spend the day at a monastery, and it's kind of a long day. You have, maybe you do some work and you spend like 5 hours meditating in your room, and you do some more work and you listen to a Dhamma talk, and it's 9 p.m. and you're like, oh, I've already done meditation today. It's time to go I just want to sleep and then get to the next day. Even though you don't need to sleep yet. You're not actually that tired, or you still have plenty of time until you need to wake up. That's what this is referring to. So you are indulging in sleep, or if we indulge in sleep when we don't need to, because essentially we want to numb our mind from reality. So we don't want to direct our mind to reality and cultivate these qualities with unremitting mindfulness, intent on directing our mind towards developing awakening. We don't want to do that. We just want to, it's enough for one day. I just want to lay here and do nothing. I just want to numb my mind to a state of dull sleep. Another example is if people drink alcohol or take harder drugs, why do they do that? Sometimes they just don't want to direct their mind towards the profound Dharma. They want to be in the mysterious dark Dharma of stupor, right? And this is kind of addressing that issue, because even if we're not heroin addicts, we are sleep addicts. Most people, right? Most of us, a lot of people indulge in sleep. Some people don't. They have the opposite problem. They have insomnia and they just are constantly awake, and that person probably needs to sleep, right? In that case, this is not the practice for you, because you're not sleeping enough. But if you are sleeping enough and you're getting enough sleep, which is part of this practice, right? During the middle of the night, they lie down on the right side, directing their attention to waking. So sometimes this is understood as, I need to stay up all night meditating, and I only need to sleep 2 hours a night. That is not the right understanding of this. Okay. The practice of alertness is lying down on your right side to sleep, but you direct your attention to waking. So what this means is, when you lie down, there's two ways of lying down. One way is, I'm just going to lay here for as long as possible. And another is, I'm just going to lay here so that my mind and body can rest, and I'll get up as soon as I'm rested. So as soon as you lay down to sleep, you're already thinking of waking up, but you're not doing it in an agitated way. So you're not thinking, I can't be sleeping, I need to just get this over with. You just lay down, and you, just like the food. So we don't starve ourselves, and we don't make ourselves eat hot coals. We still can eat food. So we can still sleep. We just sleep with the right attitude. So the attitude is not, I just need to numb my mind out and just sleep for 24 hours if possible. It's just, my mind and body, if they don't sleep, will decay, right? If we don't sleep, we'll die. Just like if we don't eat, we'll die. So if we don't sleep, we'll die. We have to sleep. We just do it with the right attitude. Okay, I'm going to sleep here. My body will rest, and I'm going to get up. And then the next practice, after waking up, just pull up the exact quote here. Then they get up. So they wake up during the last watch of the night. And whether walking or sitting, one of the readings of this text says actually that they get up and they walk. They do walking meditation. So you could take it in that way. It's an alternative reading of the text. It says basically you wake up and the night is not over yet. So what this means is that the sun, you don't sleep in until 10 a.m., for example. The night is well past gone by that time. So you sleep in the evening. The first watch of the night is referring to the evening. So this is like 5, 6 p.m. And the middle of the night, we could think of it as essentially the core part of the nighttime. So, close to around 10, 11. Depends on the time zone. It depends on the area. We don't need to get caught up in the numbers, but essentially when most people would understand that to be the time to sleep. And the last watch of the night is in the early morning. So here at the monastery, we get up, we do morning meditation at 5:30. A lot of residents and monastics, they're up earlier than that, just naturally, or because of their practice, they just naturally will get up earlier. They might practice a little bit of meditation. So you might get up at 5 a.m. At 5 a.m., the sun hasn't risen, usually, and it's still dark out, and most people are sleeping, and that is considered the last watch of the night. So if you go to bed and you sleep for 7.5 hours, and you get up and it's still nighttime, what this is saying is don't lay there and sleep because it's not day yet. You're up. You've rested. So now you practice. You dedicate yourself to alertness and you direct your mind to reality. So the mind has rested. Now it's time to practice. And that's what this is addressing. We don't indulge in sleep. We don't distract ourselves from reality. We constantly develop mindfulness. We constantly look into the nature of our experience, and we develop alert, calm, still, mindful awareness of what's going on. So this is directly countering ignorance, which is the root of all suffering. And it's also directly countering greed and hatred, because greed and hatred arise from ignorance, and they arise from, as we've talked about before, not understanding. So maybe you have greed for a sensory experience like food. We don't understand that food is not gratifying, that food, we don't own it. It's not our experience. It's dangerous. It's dangerous to eat that because we're buying into a lie. We're deceiving ourselves. So we don't understand that. So the greed arises. So we need to be alert. We need to be mindful. We need to understand, what am I doing here? Even if you're indulging in food, you should at least understand that that's what's happening, right? If you're indulging in food and you don't even know it, then it's kind of like being it's kind of like being in an abusive relationship and you think that the relationship is healthy and it needs to go on. But actually it's abusive. It's causing issues for yourself and others, right? So we don't want to not to get too caught up in this example here, but in the same way, we don't want to deceive ourselves into thinking, I could say not thinking that what's going on. Essentially, we don't want to deceive ourselves into thinking that what is going on is a way other than how it really is. So if I'm eating food because I'm indulging in the pleasure of food, at the very least, we should know that. Because if we know that, then we can understand if we want to change it or how we want to adapt to it. And if we know that we are doing this and that we have the possibility to adapt to it, which is where this teaching comes in, the Buddhist teaching, he's saying, you might know that you're indulging in food, but what do you do next? Oh, you can restrain your senses. You can develop contentment and equanimity. Then we can practice. So we have to develop, at the very minimum, mindfulness and direct our mind to what's really happening. And we have to be alert. And from there, we can start to practice. And that's where it talks about sitting and walking and purifying the mind from obstructive hindrances, which are things like greed, aversion, delusion. There are also things like sleepiness is actually one of the 5 hindrances. Trying to meditate and you're just so sleepy and dull. Maybe you're really bored and you just start snoozing out because you don't want to be alert of what's happening in the meditation. You want to be doing something else. But if the mind can't do something else, sometimes it will just put itself into a stupor. So let's say you're sitting for an extended period of time and it's just so boring. You might just doze off, just sit in a stupor. I'm not even going to think about anything, or I'm just going to daydream and kind of slowly develop a dream, kind of develop a kind of a dreaming state where I'm not aware, because being aware is painful because it's boring. So that type of attitude is the opposite of this practice, of, as the Chinese says, not neglecting continuous effort, not neglecting continuous exertion. So we want to develop a continuity. When we sleep, we do it for the sake of the body. We sleep as necessary, and we know I'm going to sleep and I'm going to get up. I'm not just going to lay here. I'm going to sleep for the purpose of resting, and then I'll wake up and I'll continue my practice. That doesn't mean that we have to, again, sit for however, like 16 hours a day or something without moving. Sitting, walking, eating, talking, all of these things, we want to develop into a practice of alertness, into a practice of wakefulness, of watching the mind, directing the mind to the Dhamma, to the reality of things, to the teachings that we've learned, try to implement them, understand them, develop these wholesome qualities. So it's essentially everything we've been talking about: sense restraint, moderation, and eating, but just extend it. When you're meditating, are you being alert? Are you directing your mind in the right way? Are you purifying your mind from obstacles and hindrances that stop you from seeing things how they are and from being at peace? So just whatever you're doing, eating, talking, even if you're engaging in very worldly things that you think have nothing to do with the practice. So you're in a work meeting talking about some completely unrelated topic. You can still say, am I speaking in a way that's, am I mindful of my speech? Is my mind getting angry? Is my mind getting bored? Is my mind getting dull? Am I thinking about something else? Am I, all of these hindrances and obstructions that block our mind from being easeful, we can still be alert, be aware of that. We don't have to doze off in the meeting. We don't have to doze off in the monastery. We don't have to doze off in our bed. We just are aware of what's going on, and when it's time to sleep, we sleep. Okay, so we've reached the end of those three practices, and the sutta ends by saying, if a bhikshu has this composure towards all of the sense faculties, knows moderation in food, and does not neglect continuous practice, ever mindfully directing their intent on the aids to enlightenment, then this bhikshu will reap two fruits: either destruction of the asavas in this life or non-return. So asavas, as I said before, we could think of them as the defilements. It literally means the inflowing or outflowing. So it's kind of like this stream that's flowing out of our mind towards all these things, or this thing, the desire and the anger that kind of maybe invades our mind. So it's kind of this flowing of these unwholesome things that keep us stuck in suffering. So if we have these three things, then we will reap one of two fruits: either complete awakening or non-return. Just as if a skilled charioteer were to drive a 4-horse chariot evenly in the middle of the road, and thus arrive without delay wherever he pleases without a doubt. Just so, any monk who is composed in regard to the sense faculties, knows moderation in food, and does not neglect continuous practice, ever mindfully directing their intent on the aids of enlightenment, can in the same way expect two fruits: either destruction of the asavas in this life or non-return. And when the monks heard this teaching from the Buddha, they rejoiced and approved. Okay, really, really briefly here, non-return is someone who is not fully awakened, but they've completely removed all desire for sensual experience. So eye, ear, nose, touch, tongue, body, not the mind. So a non-returner is someone who, if someone were to remove their hand, they wouldn't suffer on account of it. So the physical pain would be there. Physically, the body, the nerve system works, but they wouldn't suffer because there's no attachment to the sensory plane. But a non-returner still has a subtle sense of I, a subtle sense of existence, and a subtle desire, but their desire is for very deep, profound experience. So jhana and formless states. So like being a completely formless, infinite consciousness, for example, that is the type of attachment that they would have. So it's a little bit, it's not attachment to cake, but it's still attachment. And so essentially we can understand if we practice these three things, we might still be attached to infinite consciousness, but we're definitely not going to be attached to the central plane because we've completely understood and practiced these three things that the Buddha has talked about here to their fulfillment. So this is kind of a message of hope. But if we fully develop them and we understand all experience on account of them, destruction of the asavas, full awakening. So what the Buddha is kind of saying here is the minimum of this is being a non-returner, which is pretty good. So if we're practicing rightly, we don't have to be worried because, oh, if I'm practicing rightly, it should be leading towards awakening. If we feel that our practice is leading in the opposite direction, we probably should adjust that practice, because the Buddha is saying here, if you do this rightly, it's going to lead there. And so those are the 3 practices that the Buddha recommends. Composure in regards to the sense faculties, moderation in eating, and not neglecting continuous practice. So this time I will end with 3 sadhus and take questions. Sadhu, 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 anumodami. Okay, apologies for all of the rambling. And hello, Denise. Hola, ¿cómo estás? Okay, John says, how does one not get caught up in the features and details of a sight if the mere sight itself causes a strong reaction? So he's referencing, for those who don't know, features and details. Get caught up in the features and details. This is a phrase from the suttas that we often see in sense restraint. So in this sutra that I talked about, it says we don't ruminate and follow and desire the experience. In the Pali, it says you don't get caught up in the features and details that cause unwholesome mind states to arise. So we won't talk about that now, but it's the same practice essentially. He's asking if the mere sight itself causes a strong reaction. So John, if the mere sight itself causes a strong reaction, like there's a very strong association in the mind to a point of maybe it's very traumatic. So if you see something that causes it's a trigger for you because of past experiences, then you're not really getting lost in the features and details, because it's not necessarily an intentional action that you're doing. You're not indulging in that at the beginning. Your mind is just reacting. And what that is that is the result of past habits. So if you have a strong tendency, let's say that you have a fear, let's say you have, blood makes you it causes a very strong unwholesome reaction in you, the sight of blood or something. That's because you've cultivated your mind in that way in the past. It could have been past lives. So you might just have been born and blood you can't handle it. As soon as you see it, you don't even think about it. It could be past lives. It could be a result of many things. But in this life, when that happens and you allow those reactions to go on and you run away and you think that sight is what's causing that's the problem here, not the reaction, that is forming a habit in your mind to react. So even then, what happens is, even when you don't intentionally want to react, your mind will do it. It's like if you train a dog to do something, and then all of a sudden, you don't want it to do that thing, but you give it the instructions to do it. So you don't want a dog to sit, but you say sit. But you think, I don't want it to sit though. But you've already trained it to do that. So if you say sit, it's going to. So it's the same with the mind. I don't want my mind to react when this experience happens to me, but I've already but you trained your mind to do that. So it's kind of like there's this experiment, Pavlov, with his dogs, where he trained them with the sound of a bell. They would salivate because they associated the sound of the bell with food. So the dogs aren't necessarily getting caught up in the features and details. It's just that they've been trained. When they hear the bell, their mind has been trained to start thinking of food and expecting the food, to the point that when they hear the bell, without even consciously trying, their mouth starts salivating. So this is, I assume, what you're talking about with, you don't get caught up in the features and details, but there's a reaction. What you have to do is you just have to understand this reaction is occurring. I'm not going to try to run away from this reaction, the reaction is another experience that I'm not going to get caught up in. You don't get caught up in the features and details of the reaction, and you understand that the problem is not the sight. So if you see something causes disgust and horror in you because of a past experience, you just understand, okay, that's happening because I trained my mind that way. I'm going to endure this. I'm going to be aware of it. And I'm going to understand that that sight is not the problem here. The problem is my reaction. Gradually, slowly, be patient with yourself. That is habituating your mind to react to that. But it's not going to be instant because you can't stop, a moving car instantly unless you have the right force against it. So if you just have a little bit of force against a moving car, it won't stop. But slowly over time, you can hit the brakes and it will start to slow down. So that's how our mind works. It's like this, it's zooming through reality, just going crazy over all the stimuli and attaching itself constantly. So the Buddha is why we have the simile of the monkey mind, right? So you can't tame a monkey in 1 second by giving it one command. So just be patient with yourself. You can't tame your mind in 1 second by saying, oh, I'm not getting caught in the features and details. Why is my mind doing this to me? It's because it's just the nature of mind. It's been trained that way, and it will improve as you continue to practice awareness of that reaction and the right attitude, the right intention towards the reaction. Okay. John also says, I find my mind often wants to rest on something, especially TV, YouTube, etc. Today I've tried cutting that out and at least doing reading, which seems more active. How can I sustain this? Yeah, so another example of dedication to continuous practice or wakefulness, other than sleeping, sometimes we distract ourselves with TV. Because TV is kind of like a stupor, right? If we're not doing it with the right attitude, that's why we have a precept. So we avoid entertainment, singing, dancing, seeing shows. This is one of the 8 precepts. And sense restraint is essentially, the 8 precepts are essentially the 5 precepts plus sense restraint. And so things like TV, YouTube, that's another example of how we, dull our mind or indulge in experience to kind of look away from reality. And so it's very understandable. It's something that most or close to everyone in reality can relate to because it's what we do. And how you sustain the practice of not indulging in that is endurance, actually. Just like with the reaction that you asked about before. How do you stop your mind from this momentum of always going out like a wild animal towards sensory experience? The Buddha says it's like a firm post. You tie a wild elephant to the post and it will scream and it will try to get out. And eventually it'll calm down. And that's when you start to train a wild elephant. So if you capture a wild beast and you tie it to a post and then you say sit, you don't expect it to sit. It just doesn't work that way. The wild beast is going to go crazy. It has to calm down first while staying tied to the post. If you try to tame a wild animal, it's freaking out and you say, okay, I'll untie it and let it go back and I'll bring you back in a day and then you'll be ready to be trained. No, it'll start screaming again because it has to endure that process. So it's a little bit of a violent image because, it's using animals, but that's how our mind is, because our mind, we can't say, okay, I'm going to train my mind to be contented for one day. And then actually I'm going to indulge. Okay, actually I'm going to come back. But why isn't my practice at the same level it was before? Because if you let a wild animal back out and back in and back out and back in and back out and back in, it doesn't train. It doesn't improve. So these are strong habits. We have to tie them to something very firm, which is mindfulness, this right attitude towards the experience, towards mindfulness, and endurance. Just like a wild animal, it has to endure that if it wants to become tame. It cannot just all of a sudden sit at the drop of a coin or the drop of a pin. Do you know what's the heaven explains in Roman Catholic according to Buddhism? Yeah, in Christianity, heaven is a state of existence that usually is understood to be an eternal, blissful state with no suffering. In Buddhism, heaven is a state of existence that's very blissful, but it's not eternal and it's not free of suffering because it still has the roots of suffering in there. So that's a really quick answer because we're low on time. Our senses are Mara. What does Mara get out of staying here in samsara? Mara It's kind of like if you have a creature, a pet that escapes your house and you get upset. But from the perspective of the animal, what? You don't own me. I'm just living here. I don't. What if I don't want to be in the house? The pet runs away because it doesn't want to be there, but the owner says, "Get back in here," and it brings it back. That's what Mara is like. We have to have compassion because this desire to own and control things and put them in a box, we have it as well. We are the Mara of our own reality. We trap ourselves here because we don't want to let go. So Mara, what does he get? He gets possessive. He gets the possession, right? Having something that is mine. I get to have it, but it's not ours. So the sense of ownership and entitlement, that's where this comes from. That's where Mara, that's why he doesn't want us to leave reality. Or if we think of Mara even as our own mind, why don't we want to leave reality? Because we think we're entitled to experience it. Dylan says, Mara is not that comes with three ways. One is our mind, second is ourselves, third one is a God who controlling us desires. Okay. Looks like there is not a question there. John, are the defilements separate from the khandhas? Are they dhammas or qualities of the dhammas? They're just to be abandoned. They're just to be abandoned. We don't need to philosophize too deeply about it. But the defilements, briefly speaking, they're added onto our experience. So the khandhas, the aggregates, they're just our experience. It's a way of categorizing experience. So the body, physical things. The body is not anger. Anger is an attitude that we have towards the body. So the defilements aren't the khandhas, but are they separate from the khandhas? No, because you can't be angry if there's nothing there, right? How can you be angry at nothing? You can be angry at the concept of nothing, but then you have a concept, which is a perception. So the khandhas are required for the defilements, but they're not the defilements themselves. But if that's too confusing for you, then I would just drop that question altogether. When we talk about path factors or aids to enlightenment, are these also considered dhammas or are they qualities of mind? Can we observe or cognize the strengths in us? We can develop them for the sake of relinquishment. Joe says, you mentioned the four elements are maintained by food, if I heard correctly. Does that mean that the other two elements, space and consciousness, are not nourished by food? They don't need food? I'm just thinking about space and consciousness eating food. Space and consciousness require food, but not physical food. They don't require rice and dal. Space and consciousness requires attachment to, how would I put this? In order to continue experiencing space and consciousness, if we want to continue experiencing the body, we have to make the body survive with food. So food is the condition for the experience of the body. If we want to experience space and consciousness, we have to attach to them so that our mind picks that up. If we let go of that, then those things won't survive. They won't persist. So the experience of them won't persist. So the Buddha uses the analogy of food for everything. We're constantly feasting on reality, but doesn't really require food. Joe. To question. Manal says, Ayya Vaddha, how does one differentiate between what is observed as overwhelming or overstimulation of the senses, which need rest/seclusion, and the mind leaning on this reasoning too much as a method to avoid mindfulness? What is the origin of something like overwhelm, and how does one break this down further? I'm having a little bit of trouble understanding your question, Manal. I think my mind is overwhelmed, to use your terminology. I'm not senses which need rest seclusion. Okay, so I'll address this part of your question because I think this is what I can understand here. Differentiating between the mind leaning on the reasoning too much as a method to avoid mindfulness by being overwhelmed. So this is sometimes called spiritual bypassing. So let's say we are experiencing great suffering and we tell ourselves, this is not me. Our mother dies. She's not mine. She's not mine. I'm not suffering. Suffering is not real. Yes, you are. Right. You are suffering. So we can't tell ourselves that suffering isn't real and make it go away. We have to experientially let go. And if we try to force ourselves to let go, we don't let go because we're grasping onto that. So we're grasping onto the idea of letting go. So if you're holding something and you say, I have to let this go. Well, now you have to let go of two things. One is the grasping to letting go, and the other is the actual object itself. So we can't tell ourselves, this is not me, this is not mine, this is impermanent, blah, 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 to eliminate suffering. We have to just let go of it. And this reasoning is it's a kind of a condition. It's a support to give us a little bit of an understanding theoretically to put into practice. And so how we differentiate and do that is it's just about, you have to do it experientially. So sometimes you'll be reasoning too much and you'll realize, oh, I'm explaining things to myself that I don't actually experience freedom from them. I'm just talking in my head. So then you have to let go of that slowly by directing the mind back to kind of rest in that, we could say, non-attachment. So let's say that you're experiencing suffering and you're telling yourself, because you don't want to suffer, this is not mine. You need to realize I'm doing that because I don't want to suffer. So it's done out of aversion and it's just thinking. So then once you realize that, I'm just trying to explain away my experience because I don't like it. You realize what I need to really do is I need to face this fully to understand it. I need to fully face, what is this experience of suffering? And then when we face it, we start to understand gradually, oh, this is unfolding before me. It's a very quick answer because of the time, but this will take time. You'll sometimes reason too much. Sometimes you won't be doing enough thinking and you'll just be kind of being mindful, but not going anywhere because you don't have the sufficient theory to have the right view towards that mindfulness. So it's a balancing act, but the basics is be aware of what you're doing always and investigate, where is my intention coming from? Am I just trying to explain this away because I don't like it? Or am I really trying to understand it with stillness, with peace, with contentment, with composure? And what mind state is resulting? So if the resultant mind state is lots of thinking and thoughts and theory and agitation and worry and anxiety and suffering, then it's not right. So then you just observe that. And then you say, okay, I must be doing something wrong. And you redirect yourself. And then you might go too far in this direction, too far in that direction, and you slowly start to balance it out. So it's like the simile of the chariot that the Buddha gives in this discourse. He says it's like a very skilled charioteer. He drives evenly in the middle of the road, and he knows he's going to get there because he knows the way, for instance. We don't become a skilled charioteer the second we step into the chariot. All right? We don't become a skilled driver the first day we touch the driving wheel. It takes time. So practice is like that. And I will put in the comments at the request someone here the character for walking / intention. Okay. And yep, that's nearly the end. And I've gone over time. We'll just have one more question here from the online. Sense restraint sounds like dopamine detox, which can lead to depression. How to avoid? How to avoid dopamine detox, which leads to depression. If you're in depression, if you're in a state of depression because of a chemicals in your brain, then you just treat that however you need to treat it. You just continue practicing. You don't need to worry about that, right? So it's kind of like meditation can lead to schizophrenia. Sometimes people have this idea, if I meditate, maybe I'll start seeing visions or I'll go crazy because I'm just sitting there with my mind all the time. And a lot of this is just ideas or stigmas or misunderstandings of mental health and the brain and things which I don't understand, so I can't really comment on it. But we don't need to worry, if we're worried about practicing because of a theory about the brain. If you're really concerned, you should talk to someone who you think understands what they're talking about that issue. So if you're really concerned about, for instance, your physical health, then you should talk to a professional and see. But most likely, almost 99.999% of the time, you just have to let go and understand that that's just an idea. Practice will unfold. It's not going to lead to, these types of issues. Or if it does lead to these issues, you will overcome it. So if you're dopamine detoxing and that leads to depression, that will pass, because that's dopamine. Eventually, your brain will become used to the amount of dopamine that is reduced. So the point I guess I'm making here is that you don't need to worry about this. Just practice, and if you have a serious problem with your body, including the brain, then talk to a professional about it who can help you. And okay, I'm very sorry for going over time. Just want to double check that no one has any questions here in person. Okay. Too much rambling from the monk.
Too much.
Okay. So we will end at this time. Thank you everybody for attending. And we'll end with 3 more sadhus, as is traditional. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay. Be healthy and happy. May this benefit your practice.